The Wrong Side of Albert, a short horror story. Written by Stories from the Attic. Narrated by Robin Mcconnell. As you might imagine, prison is one of those places where you hear a lot of stories. Beyond the echoing footsteps and the clank of bars, the sound most often heard inside is the whispering of voices as each inmate regales the other with stories of their past, their partners, and their misdeeds. Whether it's because they feel threatened and want to bolster their reputations, or because they are bored and want to entertain themselves and each other by spinning a yarn, prisoners are notorious not only for telling tall tales, but also for exaggerating their feats and achievements. Sometimes they exaggerate to the point that their supposed crimes, as retold by them, are worlds away from what their lawyers would say they had been convicted for. During my own time inside, I heard a number of these stories and fables of misspent youth as the men around me tried to make themselves notorious. There was a drug dealer who drove a car into his rival, pinning him to a neighborhood wall, and then left him pinioned there for several days, accepting and demonstrating his control of the neighborhood by putting a bounty out on anyone who reported the incident. To hear this guy tell it, he had the whole town in an iron grip of fear, and even the police, firmly ensconced in his deep pockets, rolled past the desperate man as if nothing were happening. He alleged that it took his enemy several days to expire, left out like a warning to any other potential challengers. By the time the police finally came to remove the upright corpse, fastened to the wall like some awful scarecrow, the local dogs had taken their fill of the rotting meat, and the crows, who were not so scared after all, had made short work of some of his facial features. Then there was the guy who caught another man in bed with his wife, and after killing him with a meat cleaver, decided to heave the perpetrator's body 2 blocks to the butcher's shop he owned. When he opened up for business the following morning, the unfortunate philanderer was butchered into several still identifiable pieces, and either hung up or laid out on metallic trays, displayed in the shop window like the carcass of a pig or sheep for everyone to see. There was no question over who had committed the crime, as the butcher stood beside his wares, still wearing the stained leather apron and holding in one hand the cleaver that had begun the job. As hideous and frankly terrifying as these accounts were, and as much as we all sat around, wide-eyed and open-mouthed like kids around a campfire as the details were relayed, we all took what was said with a very large pinch of salt. When prisoners were granted limited access to the internet during the last year of my stretch, some of the stories that had been monolithic, the foundations upon which reputations had been built, evaporated into mist. Once no record of the incidents inmates recounted in such detail could be found, their stories became very fragile. Usually, if I checked the details of a story and found them to be fabrication, I kept that information to myself, reluctant to make an enemy by calling the speaker a liar, but also not wanting to expose and make them vulnerable once the rest of the men realized that a lot of their rep was built on thin air. We all did and said what we had to get along in there. It wasn't fair for me to dismantle people's defenses. Most other inmates never had the interest or forethought to check on the more implausible details. Some, I assume, preferred not to know. Realizing that if one story was called into question this way, then every claim and embellished narrative was open to the same deconstruction, the outside world having a nasty habit of throwing water onto the fires of fictions that burn well with a captive and uninformed audience. Of all the tales I heard during my 4 years inside, violent, fabulous, and frightening as they were, only one ever really scared me. Oddly, considering my personal hobby of debunking such myths, it was the one that was the most far-fetched that touched me the most. The difference, I think, was that the story was never told by the person to whom it belonged. It was never weaponized by that individual as a threat or demonstration, and was never used to bolster a reputation or boast. Moreover, when
Sample complete. Ready to continue?